My name is Toby Hopkins, and I work the night shift at an old bar on the highway cutting through the Mojave Desert. It's the kind of place where the neon sign buzzes like it's trying to stay awake, and the air smells of stale beer and cigarette smoke. Most of our customers are late-night travelers, truckers, and the occasional lost soul looking for a drink. It's lonely, but I don't mind. The solitude is predictable, safe, or at least it used to be. It was deep into the night when he arrived. A black SUV rolled into the gravel lot, its headlights cutting through the darkness like knives. The car was too clean, too polished for this place. The man who stepped out matched the vehicle, tall, refined, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that looked untouched by the desert dust. He walked with deliberate ease, his shoes clicking against the wooden porch as he approached the door. The moment he stepped inside, the air felt different. He carried an unsettling stillness, the kind that made the jukebox hum sound louder. He didn't look around, didn't glance at the old bar stools or the rows of dusty liquor bottles. He walked straight to the counter and met my gaze with sharp, unreadable eyes. "Whiskey," he said, sliding a $100 bill across the counter. His voice was smooth, too smooth. I hesitated. The drink wasn't that expensive. "You don't have a bartender?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. He already knew the answer. "No," I said, "just me." A pause. Then he smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "Good," he murmured. "That makes things easier." A chill crept up my spine. "Easier for what?" He didn't answer, just turned and walked back to his SUV. As he passed the window, I caught a glimpse of something in the back seat. A silhouette, motionless. Too still to be asleep, too rigid to be alive. The ice in his glass clinked as he lifted it. I wanted to pretend this was just another strange customer passing through, but something about him felt off. Like he wasn't just a traveler. Like he had been looking for this bar specifically. When he returned to the counter, he didn't take his change. Instead, he slid something else across the counter, a small black envelope. "For you," he said. I didn't move, didn't touch it. "You should open it," he continued. "It's an invitation." My stomach twisted. To what? His smile never wavered. Something special. He turned and walked out, the bell above the door barely making a sound as he left. The SUV pulled onto the empty road and vanished into the desert night. I stared at the envelope. My fingers hovered over it, hesitant. The air inside the bar felt heavier, the silence stretching too long. I swallowed hard, grabbed it, and turned it over. No name, no return address, just a single word embossed in deep red lettering: "Welcome." The moment I touched the seal, the lights flickered. The hum of the jukebox faltered, replaced by a low static from the old radio. Then, as I looked up, I saw it. Through the glass, where the SUV had been, now stood a figure. Tall, thin, its limbs too long, its face obscured by shifting darkness. It didn't move. It didn't need to. It was waiting. A whisper slithered through the air, curling against my ears. "You should have left with him." Then the lights went out. I felt the cold press of something against my skin. Fingers, but not quite. More like shadows with weight. When the lights flickered back to life, I wasn't alone. The bar was full, but the customers weren't normal. They were identical copies of me. Some younger, some older, some barely resembling me at all, but every single one of them had my face, my eyes, my fear reflected back at me. They sat at the tables, stood at the bar, whispered amongst themselves. I backed away, my pulse hammering. "What is this?" I whispered. A voice, my own but not mine, echoed from the nearest doppelganger. "You accepted the invitation. Welcome home." The walls of the bar seemed to stretch, the floor shifting under my feet. My reflection in the mirror behind the bar twisted, its grin too wide, too knowing. The man in the charcoal suit was never offering an invitation. He was offering a return, and I had just come back to where I had always belonged. My name is Simon Riley, and I work the closing shift at a small roadside diner just outside of town. It's an old-fashioned place with neon signs that flicker more often than they should, and a jukebox in the corner that plays forgotten country ballads. Most of our customers are regulars, late-night truckers, tired travelers, and the occasional drifter looking for a place to sit for a while. I don't mind it. The pay isn't great, but the quiet routine is comforting. And I've learned how to handle all sorts of people. The talkers, the loners, the ones who just want a cup of coffee and to be left alone. Weekends get busy, but during the week, the diner is almost eerily quiet. The thing about working the night shift is that I'm always alone. No cooks, no waitresses, just me, the hum of the kitchen appliances, and the occasional rumble of a passing semi on the highway. I don't mind the solitude, but it does make me more cautious. We get all kinds of people in here, and while most of them are harmless, I've had my fair share of odd encounters. That's why I noticed him the moment he walked in. It was sometime after 1 in the morning on a Tuesday when he stepped through the door. If I had to guess, he was in his late 40s, tall, clean-cut, and dressed a little too sharply for a place like this. He wore a black turtleneck beneath a long, dark trench coat, the kind of outfit that felt more suited for a high-end restaurant than a roadside diner. There was something about him, an air of quiet confidence, like a man who was used to being noticed but didn't need to demand attention. Not flashy, not arrogant, just controlled. He took his time surveying the diner, his sharp gaze sweeping over the empty booths, the flickering neon glow reflecting faintly in his eyes. Then, without hesitation, he strode toward the counter and took a seat. His posture was perfect, too perfect. He folded his hands neatly on the countertop and glanced up at the menu above my head, but I had the distinct feeling he already knew what he wanted. I walked over, wiping my hands on a rag, and waited for him to order. He didn't look at me right away. Instead, his eyes flicked to the coffee pot behind me, then back to my face. "Black coffee," he said, his voice smooth, almost practiced. No hesitation, no small talk, just the order. I nodded, grabbed a cup, and poured. As I set it in front of him, he finally looked me in the eye and asked, "You like working here?" I gave him a polite, non-committal smile. "I'm good where I'm at," I said, hoping that would be the end of it. But he didn't seem disappointed, not exactly. More, studying me, like he was assessing something, weighing options in his head. He took another sip of his coffee, then let out a slow exhale, drumming his fingers once against the counter. After a long pause, he asked, "What time do you get off?" The question caught me off guard. His tone was casual, but there was something unsettling about the way he said it, like he already knew the answer. I'd dealt with my fair share of customers trying to flirt, but this didn't feel like that. There was no charm, no playful smirk, just that same calm, unreadable expression. I forced a small chuckle, trying to brush it off. "Late," I said vaguely, turning my attention to wiping down the counter. It was a practiced response, the kind that usually signaled I wasn't interested in continuing the conversation. Most people took the hint, but he didn't. He just smiled, slow and knowing, like my answer had confirmed something he already suspected. Then, without another word, he reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a crisp $100 bill and placed it gently on the counter. Not slid across, not folded, just placed there deliberately, like it meant nothing to him. He drained the last of his coffee, set the cup down with the same quiet precision, then stood. "See you around, Simon," he said smoothly, before turning and walking out into the night. I stood there for a moment, staring at the bill on the counter. I hadn't told him my name. My name tag wasn't visible, and I was certain I'd never seen him before. A slow chill crept up my spine, but I shook it off. Maybe he had overheard someone say my name earlier. Maybe I was overthinking it. Either way, I took the money, slid it into the register, and tried to push the whole encounter out of my head. For the next few nights, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The diner felt quieter than usual, the shadows stretching just a little too long under the neon glow. I found myself glancing at the door more often, half expecting him to walk back in. But he didn't. Not right away. Then, about a week later, he came back. Only this time, he wasn't alone. A woman walked in beside him, tall, poised, and dressed like she had just stepped out of a high-end boutique. Something about her was off immediately. She looked like she was trying too hard to blend in, like she had studied how normal people dressed and moved, but hadn't quite nailed it. Her smile was too perfect, her eyes scanning the room a little too sharply. As they approached the counter, I forced myself to stay calm, wiping my hands on a rag like it was just another slow night. The woman slid into the seat beside him, resting her elbows on the counter like we were already friends. Before I could even ask what they wanted, she tilted her head, beaming at me. "You're so handsome," she said, her voice sugary and smooth. Her fingers brushed against my wrist, just for a second, just long enough to make my skin crawl. I forced a polite smile and pulled my hand away under the guise of reaching for a coffee pot. "Appreciate it," I said flatly, hoping she'd get the hint, but she didn't. If anything, her smile widened, like she enjoyed the reaction. The man beside her remained silent, watching the exchange with that same unreadable expression. The woman didn't order a drink. Instead, she leaned in slightly, resting her chin on her hand like we were sharing some private joke. "How long have you been working here, Simon?" she asked, her tone casual, but her eyes sharp. The way she said my name sent a fresh wave of unease through me. I didn't remember telling her, just like I hadn't told the man last time. Still, I kept my expression neutral. "A while," I said simply. She nodded slowly, like she was filing that information away. "You must meet a lot of interesting people," she mused, tapping her manicured nails lightly against the counter. "Late nights, quiet town, I bet you see all kinds." I shrugged, keeping my hands busy wiping down an already clean section of the counter. "Comes with the job." My voice was even, but I could feel my pulse ticking a little too fast. She wasn't just making small talk. She was leading somewhere. She exchanged a quick glance with the man beside her, silent but deliberate. It was subtle, but I caught it, a flicker of unspoken communication passing between them. Then she turned back to me, her smile never wavering. "I run an exclusive event club," she said, lowering her voice slightly, as if she didn't want anyone else to hear. "Private parties, very high-end. We're always looking for sharp, dependable people. Someone like you could make a lot of money." I let out a small, forced chuckle. "Sounds too good to be true." Her eyes gleamed, like she had been expecting that response. "It's real," she assured me. "No gimmicks, no strings, just a weekend of work, 10 grand, easy." She tilted her head. "You seem like someone who appreciates opportunity." The man beside her finally spoke, his voice calm and measured. "It's safe, exclusive, the kind of thing most people never even hear about." I felt the weight of their words settle over me, heavy and deliberate. This wasn't just a job offer, it was a test, a way to gauge my interest, to see if I'd take the bait. I kept my expression neutral, but my gut was screaming at me that something was wrong. I shrugged. "Appreciate the offer, but I'm happy where I'm at." My tone was light, casual, like we were just talking about any other job, but I could see it, the brief flicker of disappointment in the woman's eyes, before she masked it with another too smooth smile. For a moment, she just stared at me, her smile frozen in place, as if she was waiting for me to change my mind. Then, with an almost imperceptible sigh, she leaned back, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "That's a shame," she said lightly, though I could tell she didn't mean it. "Not everyone gets an invitation like this." The man beside her gave a slow nod, his gaze still fixed on me. "Think about it," he said. "Opportunities like this don't come around often." I nodded like I would think about it, but I had no intention of doing so. Something about them felt off, too rehearsed, too calculated. I just wanted them to leave. The woman slid a small white card across the counter toward me. No logo, no name, just an address printed in bold, black ink. "If you change your mind," she said with a wink, tapping the card once before pulling her hand away. Then, just like that, they stood up and walked out, leaving nothing behind but the lingering scent of expensive perfume and a bad feeling in my gut. A few nights passed without incident, and I started convincing myself that maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe they were just rich weirdos with too much time on their hands. But then, after closing one night, I saw it, the same black car from before. It was parked across the street, engine off, headlights dark, just waiting. A slow chill crept up my spine. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just a coincidence, but as I locked up the diner and headed to my car, I felt it, that unmistakable sensation of being watched. I climbed into my car, locking the doors the second I was inside. My fingers hovered over my phone, debating whether to call someone. Who, exactly? The police wouldn't do anything about a parked car. But as I glanced up at my rearview mirror, my breath hitched. The black car was gone. I hadn't heard an engine, hadn't seen movement. 1 second, it had been there, and the next, nothing. Just an empty street stretching into the dark. A heavy silence settled over me, thicker than it should have been. The diner's neon sign buzzed faintly in the distance, but everything else felt wrong. Like the world had tilted just slightly out of sync. I swallowed hard, gripping the wheel, trying to convince myself that maybe I just hadn't been paying attention. Maybe they had driven off without me noticing. Then, in the corner of my eye, movement. A shadow. Tall, too tall, standing at the edge of the parking lot. I snapped my head toward it, but the moment my eyes locked onto the spot, it was gone. Nothing but an empty stretch of asphalt and the distant glow of the streetlights. My pulse pounded in my ears. I knew I had seen something. I forced a breath and started my car, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. As I pulled out of the lot, I kept my gaze flicking between my mirrors and the road ahead. I didn't see the black car. I didn't see anyone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had seen me. The drive home felt longer than usual. Every shadow on the road stretched too far, twisting unnaturally in my headlights. I kept glancing in my mirrors, expecting to see the black car behind me, but the road remained empty. That should have calmed me down. It didn't. Something about the absence of the car felt worse, like they didn't need to follow me anymore, like they already knew where I was going. I pulled into my driveway and shut off the engine, but for a long moment, I just sat there. My house was dark, exactly as I had left it, but the air inside my car felt too still. It was that feeling again, the one that had been clawing at the edges of my thoughts all night. The feeling of being watched. With a deep breath, I forced myself to move. I got out, locked my car, and walked up to my front door, keys clutched tightly in my hand. The porch light flickered as I reached for the lock, and that's when I heard it. Soft, almost imperceptible. A whisper. My name. I spun around, heart hammering in my chest. My yard was empty. The street behind me was deserted. But the whisper had been right there, close enough that I should have felt breath on my skin. I fumbled with the lock, shoved the door open, and stepped inside, slamming it shut behind me. My breathing was ragged. I flipped on every light in the house, checking the windows, the back door, even the closets. Nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Then my phone buzzed, a single message, no number, no contact name, just 2 words, open it. Dread coiled in my stomach. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to look at the front door. The chain was still in place, the deadbolt locked. Slowly, I stepped closer. My breath hitched. The door was open, not just unlocked, wide open. Cold air crept in from the outside, carrying a scent I couldn't quite place, like burnt wood and something faintly metallic. My vision blurred at the edges, the walls of my house feeling too tight, too small. I had locked that door. I knew I had locked that door. A shadow moved just beyond the threshold. Not a person, something else. It was too tall, too thin, its form shifting like smoke trying to hold its shape. It didn't step inside. It didn't have to. It just stood there, waiting, watching. The whisper came again, curling around my ears, sinking into my bones. You should have come with us. And then, darkness. Darkness swallowed me whole. Then, light. A harsh, sterile glow overhead. My body jerked upright, breath catching in my throat. The diner, the shadows, the thing at my door, it was all gone. Instead, I was sitting in a stiff leather chair, my wrists resting on the cold metal arms. Across from me, a man in a white coat held a clipboard, watching me carefully. "Simon," he said slowly, like he had done this before. "Do you remember now?" My mouth was dry. My heart pounded. I tried to think, but the only thing in my head was the story I had just told. The only thing I could remember. I swallowed hard. Who am I? The psychiatrist sighed, scribbling something down. "We'll start there," he said. I stared at him, at the white walls, at the locked door behind him. Panic clawed at my chest, because deep down I already knew. Whatever I was before, it was something I wasn't supposed to remember.